All right, so through the first year of the Joe Biden administration, we have seen his priorities unfold pretty much exactly as expected. Even the half-assed neoliberal promises that he ran on are not being fought for in any substantive way. And so basically his entire agenda that he promised, especially on the social spending side of it, has been completely gutted by corporate members within his own party, with basically no pushback from Joe Biden himself. And I got a good story here for you guys. It is a breakdown from Common Dreams, and they're basically elaborating on some of these new data points that we've gotten from this great reporter named Steven Semler, and he is basically putting Joe Biden's priorities in a graphical sense on full display so that we can get an idea of what his priorities have looked like throughout his first year as president of the United States. So, Pentagon projected to hand $407 billion to private military contractors this fiscal year, and the comparison that he basically draws to this is how much Joe Biden has actually succeeded in following through on social spending items, as well as comparing this private military contractor number to the $1,400 checks that went out to the American people. So those $1,400 checks, even though they were supposed to be $2,000 checks at the time, they were basically one of the best things that Joe Biden has done throughout his first year. And I told you guys this, but if you go and actually look back at his approval rating and how it has changed over time, it was basically a week or two after he signed the $1,400 checks bill into law and they started getting sent out to the American people that then his approval rating was at its maximum point. And now it's basically at its lowest point, and that's because the American people have seen Joe Biden not be able to deliver on any further real material relief to them, basically. So again, let's just get into some of the details here in terms of how much money he is willing to shovel out to private military contractors and the defense industry in general, while basically pushing austerity on average Americans. So from Kenny Stensel, he says, President Joe Biden signed a record-shattering military budget earlier this week, and a new analysis published Thursday predicted that if recent contracting trends continue, the Pentagon will funnel $407 billion worth of public funds to private weapons makers this fiscal year, more than the federal government spent while sending out the $1,400 relief checks to most Americans in 2021. And just to remind you guys exactly what people were spending their money on when they got these checks, okay? Overwhelmingly, you can see it in the data here, they spent it mostly on monthly bills and day-to-day essentials. So basically these $1,400 checks, which again were supposed to be $2,000 checks and really should have been monthly $2,000 checks as Kamala Harris ran on, but even these one-time $1,400 checks, you see what people ended up spending that money on, right? Primarily monthly bills and day-to-day essentials. So keeping a roof over your head and keeping food on the table, basically the fucking basics. All right, so we're in the middle of a pandemic, we're in the middle of a massive economic crisis, and after they've already shoveled out trillions and trillions of dollars in bailouts to all of these billion-dollar corporations who basically took that money, stuffed it in their executive pockets, used it on buybacks for their stocks to inflate their stock prices, and continued to fuck over their workers. After they sent out trillions of dollars in relief to those big corporations, they decided to give the American people crumbs, and as you can see in the data here, the American people use those crumbs to basically take care of the bare essentials. So this data obviously pushes back on the narrative that we have seen from some corporate ghouls within the media that have been trying to say that, oh, people are, richer than they've ever been, and, the American people, we're seeing all of this inflation right now because Americans just got too much stimulus, right? But you see here, it's clearly bullshit. They were using it for the bare essentials. So this is something we should have been doing much more consistently, again, like monthly stimulus checks, but the American people got crumbs, while the defense industry is clearly being rewarded indefinitely or infinite, basically, to what they are actually supposed to be getting or should be getting in a functioning society. So they continue here with some of the details. Steven Semler, the co-founder of the Security Policy Reform Institute, found that from fiscal year 2002 to fiscal year 2021, 55% of all Pentagon spending went to the private sector military contractors. And he said, quote, if the privatization funds rate over the last 20 years holds, Semler noted, it means that the military industry will get about $407 billion from Biden's first military budget, $16 billion more than the $391 billion that those $1,400 stimulus checks cost the government earlier this year. So you guys tell me, okay, what do you think is a better investment? Letting the American people keep roofs over their head and keep food on the table for their families, or giving this money basically to private military contractors and weapons manufacturers who are going to use it to go bomb innocent civilians overseas, okay? I think it's pretty obvious which one of these is a better investment, and we should really be ending the conversation there. We should be slashing the military budget. We could cut the military budget in half, and we would still have a larger one than any other country in the world by far. FDR, and we could actually be redistributing those resources to actually materially improving the lives of the American people instead of, again, shoveling it out to people who are going to go and commit brazen war crimes with that money. But he points out here that 55% of military spending goes to contractors. Arms companies will likely get more money from Biden's Pentagon budget than through the $1,400 stimulus checks, and you can see the graphical comparison here. And he also had another good graph that I think exemplifies basically the same idea on how Joe Biden, the supposed new, next FDR, basically, how this guy basically promised that he was going to, basically what he ran on, and the agenda that he was promising people was roughly like $700 billion per year in social spending. So he ran on this idea and this strategy, basically, what he was going to try to do is focus in on China. And he was basically going to try to say China is outpacing us in infrastructure and all of these other societal social metrics, right? Which is true, and that's objectively verifiable. China has laid down, tens of thousands of miles in high-speed rail. We have basically no cool fast trains here in the United States. Our social programs are an absolute joke. They have been gutted for decades, and Joe Biden planned, or at least ran on being basically the next FDR and running on this big, bold plan where, it's crazy in and of itself that even this plan that was Joe Biden's, wildest fantasy and his wildest dream, that still he only wanted to spend less on social spending than on the military. So even that is kind of laughable at face value, but you can see here from the graph that he did not even come remotely close to succeeding in what he initially promised the American people. So the amount that Biden campaigned on, he ran on a $741 billion military budget. He ran on $700 billion per year, roughly, in social spending. And then you compare that to the $778 billion that he just signed into law for the military. So even greater than what he ran on. And then you see here the amount that he has actually succeeded in passing, basically mostly in the bipartisan infrastructure framework and other things that he has passed throughout his administration is, minuscule in comparison to what he told people he was going to deliver from them. So again, the lesson here is, what are Joe Biden's priorities? Well, clearly when he's running on the campaign and he's saying, I am this enlightened centrist, I'm going to be able to get all of these policies passed, and we're going to completely revitalize the American economy in the FDR sense. And he just completely failed. Okay, it was an absolute flop, took some massive L's, didn't really fight for his agenda, and this was the inevitable result that we all basically saw coming. So again, you see the corruption that is baked in to our government. You see the priorities, right, when it comes to childcare, when it comes to all of the other policies that were within Build Back Better, Medicare negotiating drug prices so Americans aren't getting price gouged out the ass for pharmaceutical drugs, or whether it's, again, the child tax credit, whether it's childcare, whether it's pre-K, whether it's free community college, any number of the other policies that were within the now completely gutted and eviscerated Build Back Better plan. None of those apparently can get past the Senate, past Joe Manchin, past even Joe Biden himself, but this, massively inflated military budget can easily sail through, okay? The $778 billion military budget passed through with a vast majority of Republicans and Democrats. They didn't even bat an eye, didn't say a single goddamn thing about inflation, didn't say anything about the national debt, so they basically have infinite money for private military contractors and for defense contractors, and why are they not willing to actually show up to fight for the average American as they are willing to fight to show up for the military-industrial complex? Well, again, it's pretty obvious. It's just blatant corruption. So this was a story that actually came out earlier in December, just a couple weeks ago, from Business Insider, but they were basically pointing out that at least 15 lawmakers who shape U.S. defense policy have investments in military contractors. So these 15 lawmakers that they're talking about, it's not even just that they serve in Congress, it's that these 15 lawmakers specifically sit on either the Senate or the House Armed Services Committee. So these motherfuckers, okay, 15 of them, all right, which is the vast majority of them in these committees, they own stocks directly in the defense industry. So they're crafting the legislation and passing through these inflated military budgets and then literally directly profiting off of those on the back end. So, when we have politicians like Nancy Pelosi, who just came out a couple weeks ago and said that, all politicians should be able to participate in the free market by basically doing insider trading like this, it's no surprise what the outcome is going to be. Our government, Democrats and Republicans, have basically completely been bought and controlled by the military-industrial complex. They are willing to shovel out infinite sums of money for private military contractors or for weapons manufacturers, but then when it comes to actually helping the American people, they are absolutely nowhere to be found. So again, we know the priorities of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. We know the priorities of Joe Biden, and they are absolutely perverse.